702.
Let's walk the talk on 92.7
and 106 FM.
All right, let's get into the GNU conversation, shall we? So we want to speak about the future of the government of national unity. I've had very little sleep this week. I believe every other journalist who covers politics has struggled to get 8 hours of sleep in this week because it's been that chaotic, that frenzied as closed meetings happened to try and figure out what the way forward is for the government of national unity. I think we're in a bit of an impasse. I'm not sure. We'll hear from our experts. I've got on the line, joining me via Zoom, is Prince Mashele, a political analyst, Professor Pooe from the Wits School of Governance and digital politics editor for Times Live and Sunday Times, Lizeka Tandwa. I want to start with you, Lizeka. Good morning and welcome to Radio 702. Liz, let's speak about the week that we've all had as political journalists and what you've observed around this coalition government that's supposed to be taking the country forward.
Good morning, Tilly, and good morning to your listeners. Thank you for having me. It doesn't feel like a week, does it, Tilly, for us political journalists? It feels like it's been 3 months of, us being in tenterhooks and the country being in tenterhooks over the instability of this GNU. And it's been a continuation since the government of national unity was formed. But in the last week, it's been about whether there is a crisis, whether there is going to be a reconfiguration, and whether the budget would be passed. We've seen the fiscal framework being passed in Parliament, albeit it's been without the DA, and that has presented a lot of problems for the government of national unity that is headed by President Cyril Ramaphosa. So it's been a rather tumultuous time, a time of uncertainty. What we know right now is that the ANC is currently in conversation with its political partners in the GNU and those who supported it from outside the GNU, primarily Action SA. And what is interesting for us is to see what's going to come out of those conversations. If I believe that, if I'm correct, the ANC is meant to have a discussion or negotiations with the DA on Friday or Saturday. And that's going to be interesting for us to see is whether those negotiations will come out with something concrete and tangible for South Africans in terms of where we are going with this government of national unity. Not only that, where exactly do we stand as it pertains to the 0.5% VAT increase?
All right, thank you so much, Lizeka. I do actually, before I forget, the lines are also open to you, listeners. You're more than welcome to put questions to our experts and ask them what they think. You can send voice notes or WhatsApps to 011-883-0702 if you want to call in and chat to our guests, 072-702-1702 if you want to put a question via WhatsApp or via a voice note. Prince, let me come to you now. Are we watching a standoff where we are waiting to see who will blink first? Is that the ideal way to characterize what's unfolding? I mean, there's small parties, but really, it generally feels that people are watching these two big bulls in the middle. That's ANC and DA, and wondering who blinks first. Is that a correct characterization of what's at play at the moment?
Thanks, Sidi, for inviting me, and good morning to the listeners and to my colleagues. Here is my starting point. This government of national unity, we must keep this in mind and we must never forget whatever happens, including the latest impasse, is a government of strategic enemies. The biggest two components, that is the ANC and the DA, these are strategic enemies. They are in this government to weaken each other. That is what we must keep in mind all the time when we see all the dramas. The ANC wants to see the DA weakened from within the government of national unity. The DA also wants to see the ANC weakened from the government of national unity. That's number one. Number two, and I'm going to make three observations. Number two, so when we watch happenings in the government of national unity, we must know that there will always be frictions between the two major parties. The third point, and this relates to the latest impasse, the budget and so on. The DA here committed a tactical mistake, a big tactical mistake, and I think they will not recover from it. What is the tactical mistake committed by the DA? The DA, for the first time since 1994, got the ANC to postpone the delivery of a budget speech. We had never seen something like this before. Now, that was a huge victory on the part of the DA, and the rest of South Africa knew the ANC postponed that delivery of the speech because of the DA, because the DA objected to the 2% VAT hike. That was huge for the DA. Now, then the ANC was forced to step back, and it came back and said, we will now have a 1% VAT increase, and this is going to be spread across 2 years. And the DA insisted that was not enough. The DA should have accepted that tactical retreat by the ANC. If the DA had accepted that tactical retreat, this is what would have happened. It would have registered in the psychology of the ANC that there is no big decision that the ANC can take in the GNU without the DA approving of it. Now, what the DA has done by pushing the ANC into the corner, they have actually shown the ANC a back door that actually you can look outside the GNU to take decisions within the GNU. That's how Action SA comes into the picture. So going forward, the DA will be the weakest component of the GNU because the ANC now knows there is a back door. So the DA will emerge out of this, whether they decide to stay or to proceed within the GNU. They will emerge out of this the weakest party within the GNU. So that's where we are.
Sheesh, all right. Professor Pooe, let's ask you about the issue of governance, of governing rules that they've put on the table, because the ANC is supposedly pressing a reset button. It's revisiting its coalition partners. And as Lizaka pointed out, even those who helped them deal with the fiscal framework. But I don't understand why they're talking about rules today. Rules should have been part of the conversation much, much earlier, shouldn't it? Shouldn't they have immediately after the statement of intent sat down and actually discuss what the rules of engagement should be? Even, I suggest, establishing that clearing house. It shouldn't have happened when Bella happened. It almost feels like they are quite reactionary in the GNU about what needs to be done. Your thoughts on now hearing that they want to have rules?
No, good morning, and thanks for having me. I remember having this discussion with you in December.
Me?
It was towards Christmas, so no one ever remembers. And I did say to you, we're going to come back and have the same conversation, because the pertinent thing is, what holds this thing together? And look, I know legally and contractually there's nothing by law that can allow that to happen, but it was always the key issue that was the vein, I think the weakness of this, and I call it, as I said, there's no such thing as a GNU, we have a grand coalition. There's always a strategic weakness. And what should have maybe been the gel that puts this together is, as I think Prince correctly says, look, you don't have to actually like each other. Very few professional working people like each other, but there is a thing called professional courtesy. And what should have been the glue that holds a lot of this together is, what is the actual plan for the country? And I remember stating this, that they spoke about, listen, there's going to be a clearinghouse, there's going to be this and that. And even within that discussion, they could not have an agreement, because the DA said, but listen, you owe us X amount of positions. The ANC basically roughshod them and said, this is what you will take. And then what we've been having ever since is everybody wants to look good towards their constituency. But the key overriding issue, which is always going to be the weakness, and I always want to frame this to say, I told you this in December, if there is no overriding plan about, listen, we don't like each other, but what do we actually do when we're governing? And what we've seen, I think for the last, going on to a year now, I think it's going to be a year in a few months' time, is there's been a strategic lack of direction about where is this country going in terms of the economy. You all know that's the crux of everything else. And you would have thought that the DA, because that's what they advertise themselves as being economic champions, would have been able to say, listen, ANC, on these issues, this is our red line. Because as we currently speak, we don't know what the red line is for the DA. because it wasn't the issues of Bell. And I think those were past issues which they should have been more strategic about, the Prince is saying. To say, listen, they came from the previous administration. What you should have been fighting for is a tweak, not a simple change. But in losing that, it made them lose face. But I still want to maintain that, look, it doesn't mean that the ANC all of a sudden has got a clear road. Because even if they have found a backdoor being Action SA and the rest, it almost takes us back to the situation we find in local government, where the ANC, let's say the DA fully does withdraw. The ANC is then going to be fighting to see how do we get to the magical number of 202 for certain things. And if that's the case, is this going to be like another city of Joburg or city of Tshwane, where there's going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing, but you and I as a citizen, the economy, and also issues of municipal governance falling apart is not going to be rectified. So for me, it's actually a loss on both sides. And the key issue we should be asking now is, are we having coalitions that look more like Italy, France, and Lesotho? Or is it going to be an issue where we're going to be a UK type of coalition where there's going to be an ultimate loser? And that sometimes might torpedo in the next coming election an outright win. I don't think we'll ever get there this soon, but I think those are the key questions we should be asking and thinking about.
All right, thank you so much. Lizeka, I wonder if the ANC is painting itself in a corner. I don't know what your observations are, because what Professor Pooe is pointing out is what we see at local government, where it's quite chaotic. To get one thing done, trying to have so many cooks in one kitchen, so to speak, is often actually problematic. And you don't actually want it at national level. Is the ANC painting itself into a corner? I mean, it's now has this issue with DA. They keep saying they've got issues with EFF. Some don't want to work with the EFF. They say they don't want to work with the MK. Are they not making it impossible for themselves to maneuver going forward?
I think you've put it out. You've pointed quite correctly to the concerns of the ANC. TD. Most leaders of the ANC are quite concerned about the future of the party. Should they abandon this GNU, which includes the DA? With the DA, they have 2/3 majority, and if they abandon the DA, and I think that's why Fikile Mbalula was very cautious in his statement on Tuesday. In fact, he went off script because what he said was not in line with what the NWC statement said, which was quickly removed. And that statement talked about a reconfiguration of the GNU. And when he said, he said that we are pushing the reset button on the GNU. And I think that's foremost in the minds of the ANC is, how do we proceed without a majority in that parliament? The reality is that, they have put themselves in a corner. They have pushed themselves in a corner with whether they have Action SA in that GNU, whether they do have the 202 that they need. The reality is you don't know what is going to happen in the next months. You could have the same situation with other parties. And it's not only the DA that actually went against the ANC's budget. It is Freedom Front as well, one of the GNU partners. And without those two, you find yourself in a very precarious position as the ANC. And even if you bring in the EFF, which is unpredictable in itself, that presents a whole lot, another set of problems for the ANC. And I think that they're quite alive to that reality, that they're in a corner, that without the DA, they might have much more of an issue going ahead.
All right, thank you. Prince, I want to go back to the DA with you. I recognize that you're saying that they overplayed their hand, and I think there is a general perspective that the DA made a political play that didn't work. How do they unscramble the egg, if at all? You've spoken about what they should have done. They didn't do it. They are now in the situation where it almost feels to me that they're waiting to be fired, and then the NC simply won't do it. What does the DA do? Helen Zille is publicly saying that they'll fight a removal from the GNU. They've gone to the courts. Some of them are confident that the courts will give them the remedy to go back to the negotiation table, at least with some leverage. What is ideal for them to do to remedy their situation?
Look, the GNU is a political construct constituted on the basis of political considerations by separate parties, including the DA. It's not a legal construct. So there is no that is going to solve the problems that are within the GNU. Ultimately, the DA must make political decisions about the GNU. So that's the first bottom line. The second thing, what can the DA do? My view is that the DA must stick to the GNU. They must wait to be fired by the ANC, by President Cyril Ramaphosa. They must not opt out. Because if the DA were to take a position to opt out, it would actually receive a backlash from society. I mean, my reading, and I may be wrong, but this is my reading. I think that the majority of South Africans actually support the GNU. Where do I get that? If you look at the numbers that constitute the GNU in terms of the electoral outcomes of the parties that participated last year, they constitute the majority. So, in other words, the GNU has the support of most South Africans. So the party that is going to walk out, if the DA takes that risky decision of walking out, it will have to take a backlash from society. So it must stay in there, number one. Number two, and the last point, is that they must make it clear to society what is it that they are willing to take from the ANC and what is it that they are not willing to take. The red lines. They must make us know what are their red lines. If we don't know their red lines, then they'll keep on jumping from one position to the other, but we actually don't know what will be the trigger that would inform them walking out of the GNU.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to pause there with my guests because it's 11:30. When I come back, though, we will go to some of your WhatsApps. I'll see the questions, I'll put it to them, and then we'll get more of their thoughts on the future of the Government of National Unity.
702.
It's 11:35. TD Madia in for Clement Manyatela. It is a Thursday dialogue. We're discussing the future of the Government of National Unity. I'm joined via Zoom by Lizeka Tandwa from Sunday Times and Times Live, Professor Kagiso Pooe from the Wits School of Governance and political analyst. I always say this political analyst is controversial. Prince Mashele, he's always, he's a stirrer. And we are discussing the GNU and where it's going. I do see your WhatsApps. I will put them to our experts to find out what they make and what they think of the way forward. Professor Pooe, let me ask you about because you keep calling it a grand coalition, and you're right. I'm the one with the memory problem. I can't remember December's conversation, but you keep calling it a grand coalition. Is it a waste of time to then sit at the table with Action and say, make promises about a reconfiguration of the GNU? Is it waste of time and resources to engage with Action, especially because what also is hanging while all this is happening is governance. We don't know as a country whether we headed to a cabinet reshuffle. Apparently, I'm making those claims and they're not true, but that's what we're facing.
Well, look, the way I'd look at it, and I think it kind of says maybe my December was a bit more boring than yours, so I was holding on to my...
Or maybe a day in covering politics is not
easy.
easy. That's why it's easy to forget things, yeah.
Yes, but I'll probably steal this point from Prince if he doesn't mind me saying so. I think sometimes the framing of this has actually been incorrect. And the reason I want to keep it technical by saying a grand coalition is that it then puts things in let's put it in a political science manner, that you understand that when you say it's a grand coalition, you actually factor in the fact that, listen, there's going to be ups and downs. This is not a straight line. And unfortunately, the way the narrative was produced, and I think maybe this is where I'll make a bit of a retort against our media in general, that in believing and buying the idea of a government of national unity, the only framework and point of reference people have had is to say, oh, this is like 1994, but it's a bit different. It's not like 1994. It's a grand coalition that, if, as I say, you don't even have to go to the European countries. Just go next door to Lesotho. Look at how Lesotho's coalitions have worked out. They're grand because of number, grand not because it's grand, but grand moreover because it's the complexity of the situation at hand. And if you understand it in that way, then you're able then to say, listen, what we then should be, and I think this is where maybe people who are political analysts or people who are policy specialists and even the media should be saying, we should not be that overly concerned with what I term the ups and downs, a bit like the stock exchange. We should be asking, what are the fundamental questions? And I think that's what we've been missing. If you start then framing this grand coalition and start asking fundamental questions, I think we become a bit more concerned, because it basically says, in a year, we've not moved. And that is very dangerous. And you only have to look at how we've handled foreign policy, how we're looking at local government. We are not moving. And I think that's what we should be doing. And then in reverse, what should then happen is we're then putting pressure on these political elites to say, listen, you need to grow up. We cannot be always on a Sunday, on a Monday, having shows about whether you guys are getting along or not getting along. What are you giving us in return? And I think the point of using the grand coalition framework is it's supposed to not only mature our political elite, but also mature the political debate within South Africa, such that we stop being citizens who are always at the behest of power, but start asking questions so that we can finally reverse the cycle and start putting pressure on them. Hence, I call it a grand coalition with the hope that we start asking the better and the right questions going forward.
All right. Prince, I want to bring you in on that note. It hasn't done much. It still is a formation that many look to with the hope of what it means. It reminds me a lot of the Ramaphosa era, 2018, where the idea is this goodwill that you bestow upon whoever's in governance might move the needle, might shift us in a particular manner. Part of the outrage at the moment is fear of what might be, but we haven't had enough in under a year that's moved for you to believe that actually this formation will do something substantial to get the country out of the position that it's in at the moment.
Look, when this thing was formed, and I really, I can hear Kagiso want us to be technical about political science concepts. I don't want to go down that route. When this thing was formed, I said this was the best arrangement under the circumstances, number one. Number two, I said it won't do much for the country. All it will do, it will serve as a shock absorber. And I want to stick to that observation. This expectation that this so-called government of national unity, I call it a government of strategic enemies, that it's going to do some wonders. It's going to deliver some big stuff. It's not going to happen. South Africans must keep that in mind. All it can do is to mitigate the damage that has been done by the ANC over the past 30 years. So what did we have before this so-called government of national unity? We had the ANC comrades sitting in some boardroom alone, taking decisions about our country. And if you look at the outcome of all of those decisions by the ANC comrades, you can see that the ANC comrades have actually destroyed our country. So the entry of the DA and other smaller parties into the boardroom, what it does, it stopped ANC comrades from stealing openly and from destroying our country further. That's all this GNU can do. The parties will never agree on some grand objectives because, as I said, they are there to weaken each other. They are not there to deliver some manna from heaven. We have to get that into our heads as a nation.
It's a struggle for South Africans. Let me go to the calls now. Nari in Blegari, good morning.
Yes. How are you?
I'm very good. You can put your question to the experts.
Yes. Quickly, I heard Helen File. They are speaking about that the letter of intent where it says that the GNU partners, they can ANC cannot bring other partners without without asking for a permission. And so what happened is they got this 60%. So the 60% thing is made up of ANC got 40 and the DA got 20. So it means that, and it says that the other smaller parties, they don't have leverage because they were not part of the first, that letter of intention. I think they were invited after. So I don't think so that ANC will be able to reconfigure and bring another party without the DA as well collapsing the government as well. That's what he says. I think, yes, I think there is that conflict. ANC doesn't have power that they can bring, because even if it's a verbal agreement, but in court it's legal binding because it was signed by Mbalula.
Okay, let me ask Lizeka to actually weigh in on this. Nara, thank you. That's Nara out in Blegari. Lizeka, that speaks to me almost about that issue of sufficient consensus, where the DA says we are the big parties, and almost speaks to Professor Pooe's argument. But the ANC understands sufficient consensus completely differently about the amount of power each party that's signed into the GNU actually has. Helen's saying you can't do that outside of us. Is it possible, Liz? Is it not possible?
Well, the ANC seems to think that it is possible. In fact, I had a conversation with the chief whip of the ANC last week, where he said that if it's hypocritical for Helen Zille to point out that, there should be sufficient consensus within the GNU when they themselves, as the DA, have spoken publicly about not wanting to implement, the Expropriation Act, for instance, going to court against the Expropriation Act and now going to court against the budget, which they seem to interpret as going against, in breach of the statement of intent. So that's been the problem, which I said to you when I started, TD, is that this has been a continuous problem with both parties, where they've been interpreting the very document which they crafted together. They've interpreted it very diametrically opposite in terms of what they see as the agreement. And in terms of going ahead with this, it'll be very interesting. For me, what is interesting is what will come out of not the conversations that they will have today, yesterday, as well as on Friday with the other smaller parties which form part of the GNU, but the conversation that will be between the Helen Zille and Fikile Mbalula parties, negotiators led by those two particular individuals. In terms of what Fikile Mbalula was saying, he was quite firm about, wanting to read the Riot Act as it pertains to its decision to go against the cabinet, the budget which is approved by the cabinet, by its ministers, which have publicly stated that they would go against the executive orders of the president, and also the fact that the DA is now saying that they are going to reject the budget. So I think it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks for us as political journalists. But I think what Prince is saying about these two parties being strategic enemies and not really coming into this GNU wanting to progress the country is quite accurate. It was about some level of stability for themselves. It was for their own interests, and we can see it playing out. And even if you look at what people might criticize me, but if you look at even the demands of the DA when it was venturing into, we will reject the 0.5 percentage VAT, it wasn't necessarily about the 0.5 VAT. It was about the acts or the bills that were passed in the sixth administration. It was about their own interests. It was about their own manifestos, which speaks to overall the nature of this GNU.
All right, Lizika, thank you for that. Kustas, good morning to you. Kustas out in Midrand.
I must say that thank you for a wonderful conversation, by the way. I have been very disappointed with the DA in this GNU, in a sense that they have got regional mentality. They want to pull towards the Western Cape. They want to pull things towards the Caucasians only. But also they don't talk to other parties in the GNU. That's fatal.
Yes, you hear about that a lot.
Here's the question. Isn't this now the time for the ANC, if I may ask your guests there, that they need to take out of the DA the basic education? Because if you want to achieve social cohesion in South Africa, basic education is at the center. The private schools in Midrand are overcompensated with Afrikaans and English, when the population around is actually Zulu, Tswana, and Venda, take your pick. So basic education sit at crossroads in whether we make this country a social cohesion or not. And the DA isn't keen on doing that. So why not pull that portfolio out of them, give it to Action SA, and they will drive the transformation, which that's what they also want. So that's my question. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kustas. Professor Pooe, I don't know if you can maybe speak to that. That speaks to the calls that we have been hearing for a cabinet reshuffle, but most importantly, for critical portfolios to be taken away from them.
Oh, look, I think we should not lose track of this fact that, listen, it's not as though the ANC arrived here by chance. The ANC arrived here because of poor performance. So it's one thing to look, you can hold the DA for the strategic weaknesses. And I think the call actually pointed out a critical one, which many people have been saying, even political parties, that the DA is very bad at playing with other people. One can even make the argument the ANC is actually a better coalition partner in terms of listening to other parties than the DA, which maybe speaks to the fact that the DA, much like the ANC, has a bit of arrogance about it, but the ANC has put itself in this situation where the economy has been tanking. And when you look at the issue, he speaks about basic education. It's one thing to look at Midrand. Let's look at rural areas in South Africa. Let's look at townships of South Africa. The ANC has done an abysmal job of making sure that those schools are up and running. Even here within higher education, the cuts that have been coming within higher education. So we should never simply just make this say, well, you know what, because the DA is behaving badly, it must mean the ANC must do more. No. We're in this mess because the ANC has not done its job. What we should be asking is the key question to say, and this is where I think, as I said, looking at the future, because look, the mess we're in at the moment, if you look at policy, if you look at the indicators, it's not going to take a year, it's not going to take two. We're literally looking at 10 or 15 years of trying to fix South Africa. So what I'm trying to maybe posit towards, if we're going to be stuck in this thing of grand coalitions, is to say, what's going to be done differently that has not been done in the last 30 years? Because if we're simply saying, let's improve on the stuff that we did in the last 30 years, well, this is a mess that we got ourselves into. And I think, and this is maybe the critical issue, I don't think we have a culture or a political elite that is up to standard to be able to get us to where we need to get to. And part of it, I think, also comes from ourselves as citizens, that we don't put forward the best among ourselves. I always use this simple example. If you look at the period between 1999 and all the way, maybe 2007, 2008, one can make the argument that it was the best, give or take death aside, the best of that generation could give us. Subsequent to that, we all know if we literally took the best and brightest in this country, within 5 or 7 years we could fix this. But unfortunately, because we don't have those things, and the best way to put it, especially for the ANC, is the ANC does not have a Deng Xiaoping, the man who reformed China completely. So to expect them to do anything differently to what they know, it's not going to get us there. And the DA is also proving itself to be a bit unable to work with others and actually give South Africans a different picture of what the future could be, because we still hold them to what, unfortunately, they are currently doing and proving what people don't like about them.
Equally weak political parties, actually. I had met Barbara Masekela in studio just before this conversation, and the messages I kept getting about the vacuum, that listening to her makes you realize the caliber of people who helped lead the transformation and the democratic breakthrough versus who we are today. I think that is a fundamental issue that many people have raised. I want to go to some of the WhatsApps and voice notes now. Abel? Do you have voice notes? No? Yes? No? Please.
No, good morning and good morning to your guest. I totally disagree with the view of Prince when he says that the majority South Africans are in for the GNU. That is totally incorrect. It is totally incorrect. I think this is a marriage of coincidence between the ANC and the DA. You know, we might disagree to agree that the ANC in this GNU represents its political interests as much as the DA. So what is unfolding before us as South African is that this is a left-wing and the right-wing opposition.
CD, good morning. It's Israel here, Krugersov. I just wanted to find out, could you please ask Prince Mashele that what's going to happen now should the ANC decide to sort of let the DA go, or the DA if they decide to go. Otherwise, if they do decide to stay, CD, how would their ministers implement the the budget that they didn't vote for? So, how is this whole thing going to unfold? It's very interesting. We're living in a very interesting time. But yeah, I just wanted to know whether they go or they stay. But what would happen definitely? If they do stay, and then would they still be able to implement those? They use the budget that they didn't want to vote for? Or else, if they do go, do you think, Action SA and Bosa and probably whoever, will they be able to, to fill up that gap that DA left? I'll listen on the radio. A great show as always, CD. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you so much, Prince. I think you've got that loud and clear. What happens if they do go, if they don't go, or rather, I mean, there was meant to be a cabinet meeting today. It was called off, and I don't want to lie to you. I wasn't convinced about the reasons. Yeah, we get cancellations every day. Part of the cabinet members themselves were saying to me, it's going to be so awkward having to put up with each other. So then it's cancelled. We're given a whole myriad of reasons, but trying to work together, Prince, going forward. I think I saw yesterday, Dean McPherson and Sisisi Tolash at an event. I thought, if only they could actually be like this. Your thoughts about what happens if they both refuse to budge and then they remain in the GNU and in government?
Well, let me start by warning Kagiso that if he calls for the best to be in our parliament, his head is going to be chopped off like mine. Recently, I said we shouldn't have uneducated people in parliament.
No, Prince. It was how you put it. Yeah, even I know that you were wrong.
Yeah, that's fine. I just to warn my friend Kagiso. But I think on a more serious note, look, here are the options ahead of us as a country, given where we are. Option number one, it's for cool heads on the part of the DA and the ANC to prevail and say, let's go back to the GNU. That's option number one. There are implications for that option. If they go back to the GNU, given what has happened, we must expect that the GNU is going to be a weaker entity. We must not expect big stuff to come from it. That's option number one. And it's a better option, by the way, in my view. Option number two, it's for the
I think there's something going on with his line there. But I am also running out of time. Prince, are you back up? Hold on. Prince?
Hello?
I think I've got you now. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying option number two, it's for the DA to walk out of the GNU, out of its own volition, or to be kicked out of the ANC. So if we have that option playing itself out, the ANC would most likely bring in more smaller parties such as Action SA to have a slight majority in parliament. And we have seen that can actually work in terms of securing votes. But that option also would not be stable because the smaller parties along the way would try to play their hands in order to extract political profit out of that arrangement. So those are the two options that are in front of us. At the end of the day, after we have spoken, I can guarantee you will get either of the two. But the bottom line is that we must expect to have a weaker government of South Africa for the next 20 years because there is no party in the next 20 years that is going to emerge as a majority electorally. So we must get used to this chaos. What are we going to do to develop leadership so that we mitigate this in the long term? That is the strategic question for South Africa.
All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much. I have run out of time. Like, the clock has been running away from me. I was joined there by Prince Mashele, political analyst, Professor Kagiso Pooe from the Wits School of Governance, and Lisa Tandwa, who's the digital politics editor for Times Live and the Sunday Times. I think it's about us, right? We need to think about what is best for our country. Because if you listen to all of them, there's nothing to look forward to as far as the political leadership is concerned. I'm going to leave it there.